Attention! This channel provides original historical analysis based on sources and research. We do not simply recount events, we analyze their causes and consequences, explaining them through original narration, editing, and visual diagrams. A list of sources is included in the description. Enjoy watching. Welcome! Today we're examining a tactical innovation from World War II that emerged not from high command or training manuals, but from the frozen mud of the Hurtgen Forest in December 1944. What you're about to hear is a documented account of how one American soldier's unauthorized decision changed sniper doctrine forever and led directly to his court-martial. This is the story of Private First Class Eddie Brennan. December 14, 1944. 7:23 a.m. American Private First Class Eddie Brennan lies motionless in frozen Belgian mud beneath a fallen oak tree in the Hurtgen Forest. German machine gun fire tears through branches 2 meters above his head. His platoon is pinned down, bleeding into the snow. In the next 4 hours, Brennan will violate every rule in the United States Army Sniper Manual and eliminate 18 Wehrmacht soldiers from a position so unconventional that military doctrine explicitly forbade it. His court-martial will begin 63 days later. The Hurtgen Forest was where American infantry went to die. Between September and December 1944, this dense woodland complex along the German-Belgian border consumed entire divisions. Trees exploded into splinters under artillery bombardment. Visibility dropped to 30 meters. German pillboxes, invisible until the moment of death, controlled every approach. The 28th Infantry Division lost 6,184 men in 3 weeks of fighting. The forest didn't discriminate based on training or tactics. It simply killed with mechanical efficiency. The Americans called it the Death Factory. German defenders called it the Fleischwolf, the meat grinder. Both descriptions were accurate. The terrain itself was the enemy. Dense stands of fir and pine blocked sunlight even at midday. The ground was a mixture of mud, snow, and decaying vegetation that made movement exhausting. Stream beds became killing zones. Every clearing was pre-registered for German artillery. Every trail was covered by interlocking fields of fire. Eddie Brennan grew up in South Philadelphia, 3 blocks from the Navy Yard. His father worked the docks, loading cargo ships bound for Europe. Eddie spent his childhood navigating narrow streets between row houses, learning to fight in alleys where backing down meant getting your face split open. The rules were simple: hit first, hit hard, or go home bleeding. He dropped out of school at 16 to work at Hog Island, riveting Liberty ship hulls for 12 hours a day. The work was brutal, but it taught him patience. Waiting for the rivet gun to heat, waiting for the foreman to look away, waiting for the right moment to act. Eddie learned that patience wasn't passive. It was calculated preparation for decisive action. Before the war, Eddie hunted deer in the Pine Barrens every November. Not for sport, for meat. His family needed it. He learned to move through brush without sound, to wait motionless for hours in freezing cold, to take shots other hunters wouldn't risk. His uncle taught him to read terrain, to think like prey, to understand that the deer wasn't afraid of you specifically. It was afraid of what you represented: movement, noise, the smell of cigarettes and cheap whiskey. Eddie learned to eliminate everything that made him human, to become part of the landscape, to wait with the patience of wood and stone. Eddie was drafted in March 1943. Fort Benning turned him into a rifleman. He qualified expert with the M1 Garand, scoring in the top 5% of his training company. But the Army didn't make him a sniper. They had enough snipers. They needed bodies for the line, men to fill the gaps left by casualties, replacements. Eddie went to Europe as a replacement, assigned to Company B, 110th Infantry Regiment, 28th Division. He arrived in October 1944, just in time for the Hurtgen. He'd been in country for 6 weeks when the forest started killing his friends. The forest killed men in ways Eddie had never imagined. Artillery bursts in the treetops sent wood splinters down like javelins, shredding soldiers who thought they were safe in foxholes. German snipers fired from positions so well camouflaged that entire platoons walked within 3 meters without seeing them. The mud was so thick it could pull boots off men's feet. The cold was so deep it froze morphine in medics' bags. Men died from hypothermia in their sleeping bags. They died from tree bursts that left no visible wounds but turned their insides to pulp. They died from stepping on mines buried under autumn leaves. They died from sniper fire that came from nowhere and everywhere. The official doctrine for American snipers was explicit and unambiguous. Elevated positions, maximum visibility, clear fields of fire. Find high ground, use trees for vantage points, maintain line of sight. Field Manual 23-10, Sniper Training and Employment, published 1943, dedicated entire chapters to the superiority of elevated shooting positions. The theory made perfect sense on a rifle range in Georgia. In the Hurtgen, it was suicide. Eddie watched men die following that doctrine with methodical regularity, and he started to understand that the manual was written for a different war, fought in different terrain, against a different enemy. Write in the comments what city you're from and subscribe to the channel. This is the best support. And we continue. November 8, 1944. Private Vincent Hayes climbed a pine tree to establish an observation post. He was 23 years old, from Indianapolis, engaged to a girl named Sarah who worked at a department store. Hayes talked too much about her. Every conversation eventually circled back to Sarah. What she wore, what she said in her letters, the house they'd buy after the war. Eddie didn't talk much, but he listened. In the forest, listening kept you alive. A German sniper put a round through Hayes' chest at 9:47 a.m. The shot came from somewhere in the gray-green blur of trees to the north. Hayes fell 6 meters and died in the snow, blood pooling around him in a spreading dark stain while the platoon scrambled for cover. They called for a medic, but Hayes was already gone. The German sniper was never found. The platoon searched for 3 hours, checking every tree, every position with decent sight lines. Nothing. November 19th. Corporal Samuel Briggs set up on a ridgeline overlooking a crossroads. Briggs was a veteran, 3 months in the forest, which made him ancient by Hurtgen standards. He had perfect visibility for 400 meters, could see the crossroads clearly, watch for German movement, call in artillery if needed, textbook sniper positioning. A German counter-sniper spotted his position within 90 minutes and called in mortar fire. Briggs took shrapnel to the throat. The fragments severed his carotid artery and trachea. He drowned in his own blood before the medic reached him, choking and convulsing in the snow while his squad mates watched helplessly. The medic said later that even if he'd been standing right there was nothing he could have done. The wound was unsurvivable. Briggs was 19 years old. November 27th. Sergeant Thomas Orr used a blown-out farmhouse as a sniper nest. Second floor, western window, textbook positioning. The farmhouse had been shelled weeks earlier, walls half collapsed, but the second floor was mostly intact. Orr set up behind a pile of rubble that gave him cover and concealment. He killed 3 Germans in the first hour. Professional shots, clean kills, exactly what the manual prescribed. A Panzerfaust team obliterated the building 20 minutes later. The Germans had watched Orr's muzzle flash, triangulated his position, and called up anti-tank weapons. The Panzerfaust round punched through the farmhouse wall and detonated inside the room. They found Orr's rifle in the rubble 3 days later. They never found enough of Orr to bury. They sent his personal effects home in a canvas bag. Eddie had shared a foxhole with Hayes during an artillery barrage in early November. They'd been pressed together in frozen mud, shoulders touching, while the world exploded around them. German 105mm shells walked through the forest in methodical patterns. Each impact shook the ground like an earthquake. Hayes had been terrified, talking non-stop about Sarah, about home, about anything except the shells. When Hayes died, Eddie felt something shift inside him. Not grief. He'd learned to bury that after watching his first man die in October. Something colder. Calculation. The recognition that emotion was a luxury the forest didn't allow. Hayes had followed doctrine. Hayes was dead. The correlation seemed significant. The problem wasn't the men. Hayes, Briggs, Orr, they were good soldiers, competent, careful, professional. They'd done exactly what they were trained to do. They'd followed Field Manual 2310 to the letter. And they'd died because of it. The problem was the doctrine itself. The fundamental assumptions that underpinned American sniper training were wrong for this terrain. American sniper training emphasized what the instructors called dominant positioning. High ground, clear sight lines, maximum range. The theory was sound. From an elevated position, a sniper could observe enemy movement, engage targets at long range, and control significant terrain. The training manuals were full of diagrams showing snipers in trees, on rooftops, on hilltops. German snipers had been fighting in forests since 1941, from the birch woods outside Leningrad to the pine forests of Poland. 3 years of Eastern Front combat had taught them lessons the Americans were just beginning to learn. They'd adapted their tactics to dense woodland. They'd learned what worked and what got you killed. In dense woodland, elevation makes you visible. Height makes you a target. Eddie understood this instinctively. He'd hunted deer for 8 years in the Pine Barrens, and deer didn't look up. They looked across. Horizontal threats. Movement at eye level. A man in a tree was silhouetted against the sky, even through branches. The human outline, perched above the natural tree line, drew the eye immediately. A man on the ground was just another shadow among thousands, indistinguishable from fallen logs, root balls, underbrush. But Field Manual 2310, Sniper Training and Employment, published 1943, was explicit on page 47, section 3, paragraph 2. The sniper should seek elevated positions that provide observation over the maximum area of the battlefield. Elevation provides tactical advantage through extended sight lines and superior observation capability. The Army didn't train snipers to fight from ground level. They trained them to climb. December 2, 1944. Eddie watched another sniper die. Staff Sergeant William Peterson, 5 years older than Eddie, a hunter from Montana who should have known better. Peterson had grown up hunting elk in mountain terrain. He understood fieldcraft, understood patience. But he'd been trained by the same manual as everyone else. Peterson positioned himself 6 meters up an oak tree, trying to spot German movement near a contested road junction. Eddie was 50 meters away, prone behind a fallen log, watching Peterson work. He wasn't on a mission. He was just observing, trying to understand why men kept dying in elevated positions. Peterson was methodical, careful. He'd wrapped his rifle in burlap to break up its outline. He'd positioned himself in shadow. He was doing everything right according to doctrine. The German round hit Peterson in the left eye at 2:17 p.m. He didn't make a sound, just dropped his Springfield and fell, hitting 3 branches on the way down. The rifle clattered against wood with a sound like breaking glass. Peterson's body landed in a heap at the base of the tree, one leg bent at an impossible angle. Dead before he hit the ground. The German sniper never fired a second shot. Didn't need to. Eddie lay motionless for 3 hours, watching the tree line to the north. He never saw the German, never heard movement, never detected any sign of the shooter. The German had fired from ground level, from somewhere in the undergrowth approximately 200 meters away. Perfect concealment. Zero visibility from Eddie's position. Eddie realized something fundamental in those 3 hours. The German wasn't hiding in the forest. The German was part of the forest, integrated into the terrain so completely that detection was nearly impossible. That night, Eddie couldn't sleep. He lay in his foxhole, staring at the black silhouette of tree branches against the sky, thinking about deer. About how they survived in terrain full of predators. They didn't climb to safety, they sank into it. That night, Eddie couldn't sleep. He lay in his foxhole, staring at the black silhouette of tree branches against the sky, thinking about deer. Not about the war, not about Hayes or Peterson or the men he'd watched die. About deer. About how they survived in the Pine Barrens, where every hunter in South Jersey came looking for them every November. Deer bedded down in low brush, under fallen trees, in natural depressions where the ground concealed them. They didn't climb to safety, they sank into it. Predators looked for movement at eye level and above. Wolves, coyotes, human hunters. They scanned the horizon, watched the tree line, searched elevated positions. They didn't look down. Why would they? Threats came from eye level. That was how predators thought, how they hunted. And men were predators. German snipers were hunting American snipers using the same instincts. What if a man could do the same thing a deer did? What if, instead of climbing up to gain visibility, a sniper went down to gain concealment? The idea seemed obvious once Eddie thought of it, but it violated everything the Army taught. Everything in Field Manual 2310 emphasized height, elevation, dominant positioning. But the manual hadn't been written for the Hurtgen Forest. Eddie approached Captain Whitmore the next morning, December 3rd, at the company command post. Whitmore was 31 years old, a former high school teacher from Columbus, Ohio, who'd been given a company to command after the previous commanding officer took machine gun fire in the face during a German counterattack on November 8th. Whitmore was trying to keep 200 men alive in a forest specifically designed to kill them. He didn't have time for theory or speculation. "Sir," Eddie said, standing in the entrance to Whitmore's dugout, "the snipers are dying because they're too high." Whitmore looked up from the map he was studying. His face was gray with exhaustion. He'd slept maybe 10 hours in the past week. "Elevated positions provide visibility, Brennan. That's doctrine. That's what separates snipers from regular riflemen." "Doctrine's wrong for this terrain," Eddie said. He kept his voice level, factual, not argumentative. "Germans are shooting from the forest floor. We're climbing trees and dying. Every sniper we've lost in the past month was in an elevated position. Hayes, Briggs, Uhr, Peterson. All of them followed the manual. All of them are dead. You want to engage targets from ground level? You'll have zero visibility. You won't be able to see anything beyond 30 meters. That's not sniping, Brennan. That's ambush work." Whitmore's tone wasn't dismissive. He was genuinely considering the problem. "I'll have concealment," Eddie said. "That matters more than visibility in terrain like this. The Germans can't kill what they can't see." Whitmore shook his head. "The manual exists for a reason. Elevated positions maximize effectiveness. Generations of military experience went into that doctrine. You can't just throw it out because a few men got unlucky." He paused. "I'm sorry about Hayes. I know you two were close." "The manual was written for open terrain," Eddie interrupted. His voice was still calm, but insistent. "Fields, plains, desert, places where you can see for kilometers. This isn't open terrain. This is 30-meter visibility and tree-burst artillery. Height doesn't help here. It kills. We're silhouetting ourselves against the sky, and the Germans are picking us off." Whitmore stared at him for a long moment. "You're a rifleman, Brennan, not a sniper, not a tactical instructor. You've been in this forest for 6 weeks. What makes you think you understand this better than trained snipers with years of experience?" "Hayes was a rifleman too," Eddie said quietly. "Briggs was a corporal. Uhr was a sergeant. They all had more rank than me. They all had more training. They're all dead. I'm asking permission to try something different. One position, one day. If it doesn't work, you've lost one rifleman. If it does work, maybe we stop losing snipers. And if you get killed doing it, I'm down one rifleman instead of another sniper." Whitmore's voice was flat. He'd written too many letters home to families. Too many condolences for men who'd followed orders and died anyway. "At least you're not Peterson." He should have known better. Whitmore was silent for a long moment. He looked back at his map, at the positions marked in grease pencil, at the casualty reports stacked on his field desk. Then he said, "I didn't authorize this conversation. Clear?" Eddie nodded. "Clear, sir." "Don't get caught," Whitmore said, still looking at his map. "And don't miss. If you're going to violate doctrine, you'd better make it count. I can't protect you if this goes wrong." He paused. "Radio check every 2 hours. If you miss a check, I'm sending a patrol." That night, Eddie began preparing. He wasn't going to dig a hide or build a nest. Those left evidence, disturbed the terrain, created positions that could be spotted. He was going to disappear into the forest floor itself, use what was already there. He needed a fallen tree, something massive with root structures still attached, creating a natural cavity underneath, something that looked like it had been there for years. The Hurtgen was full of them. Artillery and wind had toppled oaks and pines throughout the forest. Months of bombardment had created a landscape of fallen timber. Most lay half buried in mud and snow, rotting slowly into the earth, covered with moss and debris. Natural, undisturbed, invisible. Eddie found what he needed on December 12th during a routine patrol. A massive oak, 18 meters long, blown over by artillery sometime in October or November. The root ball had torn free from the earth, creating a depression 4.5 meters across. The trunk had fallen at an angle, leaving a gap underneath. Maybe 35 centimeters of clearance between the trunk and the frozen ground. Snow had drifted against the log, providing additional concealment. From 10 meters away, it looked like every other fallen tree in the forest. Unremarkable, natural, part of the landscape. From 1 meter away, it still looked like every other fallen tree. Eddie walked past it twice before he noticed the gap underneath. Eddie crawled underneath to test the position. The space was tight. He had to worm forward on his elbows, pushing with his toes, dragging his rifle beside him. The ground was frozen mud, hard enough to support his weight without leaving obvious impressions or tracks. The root ball created a natural backstop, blocking any silhouette from behind. The trunk itself was 1 meter thick, solid oak that would stop machine gun fire. He positioned himself facing north, toward German lines approximately 300 meters away. Through the gap between trunk and ground, he had a horizontal sight line across the forest floor. Maybe 15 centimeters of viewing angle, a narrow slot, but it stretched for 200 meters through the undergrowth. He could see the bases of trees, the undergrowth, the small rises and depressions in terrain. Movement at ground level would be visible. He couldn't see the sky. He couldn't see anything above 1 meter in height. No treetops, no elevated positions, no birds. Just the forest floor stretching away into gray-green distance. Perfect. This was how deer saw the world. This was how they survived. Eddie spent 3 hours under that log on December 12th, not moving, just watching. Testing the position, understanding the sight lines, learning the terrain. He saw a deer pick its way through the snow 80 meters out, moving cautiously between trees, pausing every few steps to test the air. The deer passed within 50 meters of Eddie's position without detecting him. He saw 2 German soldiers walk past close enough that he could hear them talking. They were speaking quietly, nervously, weapons ready. Neither looked down. Why would they? Men fought at eye level. Threats came from elevation, from tree lines, from ridge tops, from windows and rooftops and observation posts. Every instinct, every bit of training, every combat experience taught soldiers to watch the high ground. Nobody expected danger from the forest floor. The ground was where you took cover, where you crawled when under fire, where you died, not where you attacked from. Eddie crawled back to American lines after dark, moving slowly and carefully through the undergrowth. His uniform was caked with frozen mud, stiff with ice. His hands were numb, his fingers barely functional. But he knew it would work. The position was perfect, invisible, protected, with clear sight lines across the forest floor. The question was whether the Army would let him live long enough to prove it. On December 13th, Eddie told Whitmore he'd found a position. He didn't explain the details, didn't describe the fallen oak or the ground-level hide. Whitmore didn't ask. The captain understood that some conversations were better left vague, that plausible deniability protected both of them. Whitmore just nodded and said, "Radio check every 2 hours. If you miss a check, I'm sending a patrol to find you." Eddie nodded. "Understood, sir." He appreciated that Whitmore didn't ask where the position was, didn't demand coordinates or tactical justification. The captain was giving him rope. Whether Eddie used it to climb or hang himself was Eddie's decision. "And Brennan," Whitmore added, his voice quiet, "if this works, I never gave you permission. If it doesn't work, I definitely never gave you permission. You're doing this on your own initiative. Clear?" It was the standard officer's disclaimer. Protection for Whitmore if Eddie got killed or court-martialed. "Yes, sir," Eddie said. "Crystal clear." Eddie moved into position at 4:30 a.m. on December 14th. Dawn was 90 minutes away. The forest was completely dark, no moon, heavy cloud cover blocking any starlight. He crawled under the fallen oak in complete darkness, navigating by memory and touch, dragging his Springfield rifle and a canvas bag with 300 rounds of ammunition. He wore every piece of cold weather gear the Army issued: wool long underwear, wool sweater, field jacket, overcoat. But he knew it wouldn't be enough. Ground level in December meant lying in direct contact with frozen earth, moisture seeping through cloth no matter how many layers, no movement to generate heat, no ability to shift position or warm up. The cold would be relentless, methodical, patient. He'd be hypothermic in 4 hours if he wasn't careful, 3 hours if conditions were bad. He settled into position, arranged his rifle, checked his sight lines. Then he packed snow against the gaps around his body to eliminate any silhouette, any space where light might show through. The snow would also provide minimal insulation. He checked his watch. 4:47 a.m. He keyed his radio once to confirm it was working, then settled in to wait. Dawn came slowly on December 14th. Gray light filtering through the tree canopy, turning black forest into endless shades of gray and brown. No color, just gradations of shadow. Eddie lay motionless, breathing slowly and shallowly, watching his sector through the 15-centimeter gap. The German line was somewhere between 200 and 400 meters north. Exact positions unknown. No American patrols had penetrated deep enough to map German defensive positions accurately. At 6:15 a.m., Eddie saw movement, his first potential target. A German soldier, maybe 220 meters out, moving between trees with casual confidence. Feldgrau uniform, M43 field cap with ear flaps down against the cold, Kar 98K rifle slung over his shoulder. The soldier was walking casually, not tactically. Cigarette smoke visible in the cold morning air. Not expecting contact this deep in the woods, this far from the active fighting. Eddie watched him through the Springfield scope. The German stopped, leaned against a tree trunk, finished his cigarette. Eddie could see him clearly at this range. Young, maybe 20 years old. He ground out the cigarette against the tree bark, then moved on, disappearing into the undergrowth heading east. Eddie didn't fire. The shot was possible, maybe 60% probability of a hit at that range through intervening brush. But it was too easy to miss, too likely to give away his position for an uncertain kill. He needed certainty. He needed targets he couldn't miss. So he waited, controlling his breathing, watching the forest. At 7:23 a.m., the German machine gun opened fire. Eddie heard it first, before he saw anything. The distinctive ripping sound of an MG-42 firing somewhere east of his position, maybe 250 meters away. The sound was unmistakable. 1,200 rounds per minute, So fast, the individual shots blurred into a continuous tearing noise like ripping canvas. Then he heard American voices shouting, rifle fire returning in scattered bursts. His platoon was pinned down, probably by the same machine gun nest that had hit them 3 days ago. Eddie keyed his radio, pressed the transmit button. "Brennan to Whitmore. Contact east, 200 meters. I'm holding position." Static crackled. Then Whitmore's voice came back, tense but controlled. "Copy, Brennan. Stay quiet unless you've got a shot. We're pulling back if we can't suppress that gun." Eddie scanned his sector, looking for targets. The machine gun fire was loud, echoing through the forest, masking all other sound. Perfect conditions for movement. The Germans would use the covering fire to advance, to flank the American position. That's what Eddie would do. Movement to his left, exactly as predicted. 3 German soldiers running forward through the undergrowth, using the covering fire from the MG-42 to advance toward the American position. They were moving fast, low, professional. Infantry who knew their business. Not the casual soldier smoking a cigarette. Combat veterans executing a textbook flanking maneuver. Eddie tracked the lead soldier through his scope. Range approximately 180 meters. Target moving left to right at maybe 15 kilometers per hour. Wind negligible in the dense forest. The Springfield was zeroed for 200 meters. Eddie adjusted slightly, leading the target's movement by about 1 meter, accounting for the time the bullet would take to travel the distance. He fired. The recoil slammed into his shoulder, trapped between his body and the frozen ground with nowhere to dissipate. The sound was enormous in the confined space under the log, echoing off the oak trunk above him. His ears rang instantly. The German soldier dropped instantly, falling forward into the snow like someone had cut his strings, dead before he hit the ground. The other 2 German soldiers froze, scanning the tree line, looking up and around. Not down. Their training, their instincts, their combat experience all told them the same thing. Snipers shoot from elevation. They checked the trees, the ridge lines, the high ground. They never thought to look at the forest floor, where Eddie lay invisible beneath the oak log. Eddie worked the bolt. The spent casing ejected, bounced off the underside of the log with a metallic ping, landed in the mud beside his face, still hot from the powder charge. He chambered another round, the action smooth and familiar, found the second German in his scope. The man was crouched behind a tree trunk, weapon ready, eyes scanning the branches above. Still searching for the shooter in all the wrong places. Eddie fired again. Hit. The .30-06 round caught the German center mass. The man pitched backward, clutching his chest, and went down hard. The third soldier ran. Smart decision, wrong direction. Eddie tracked him through the scope, led the movement, fired. Missed. The German disappeared into heavy undergrowth, running hard toward the German line. Eddie chambered another round, scanning, waiting. The machine gun had stopped firing. Silence spread through the forest like spilled water, sudden and complete. Eddie lay motionless, controlling his breathing, watching his sector through the narrow gap. His ears rang from the muzzle blast in the confined space. His shoulder ached from the recoil with no room to absorb it. The smell of gunpowder hung in the air under the log, sharp and acrid, mixing with the smell of frozen earth and rotting wood. Minutes passed. Nothing moved. Eddie counted his breathing. 4 seconds in. Hold for 4. 4 seconds out. Keep the heart rate down. Stay calm. The cold was working into his bones now, but he ignored it. Cold was temporary. Visibility was permanent. The Germans knew there was a sniper now. They'd be careful. Then Eddie saw them. 4 German soldiers advancing in a skirmish line, approximately 50 meters spacing between each man. They were moving cautiously now, weapons up, checking every tree, every shadow, every piece of cover. They knew there was a sniper somewhere in this sector, they just didn't know where. They were doing everything right according to their training. Eddie let them come closer. Patience. The leftmost soldier was 140 meters out. The rightmost was nearly 200 meters. Eddie watched them through the scope, selecting targets, prioritizing. Standard tactical thinking. Eliminate the closest threats first, then work outward. Closest first. He fired. The leftmost soldier dropped instantly. Eddie worked the bolt without thinking, muscle memory from 1,000 repetitions on the range. Fired again. The second soldier went down, screaming. The other two hit the dirt, returning fire blindly toward where they thought the shots had come from. Rounds smacked into trees, tore through underbrush, kicked up snow in scattered impacts. None came close to Eddie's position. They were aiming too high, shooting at elevated positions that didn't exist. Their training was killing them. Eddie waited. 10 seconds. 20. One of the Germans moved, trying to low-crawl toward cover behind a fallen log. Eddie put a round through his spine at 165 meters. The fourth soldier broke and ran, stumbling through the snow, heading back toward German lines in full panic. Eddie let him go. Let him tell the others what happened. Let him spread fear. The forest went quiet again, except for the moaning of the wounded German. Eddie keyed his radio. "Brennan to Whitmore. 5 confirmed. No contact on my position." "Jesus Christ, Brennan, where the hell are you?" Whitmore's voice was tight with stress. 5 kills in less than 30 minutes from an invisible position. "Ground level, under a log." Silence on the radio. Then, "Say again?" Whitmore thought he'd misheard. "I'm prone under a fallen tree. They can't see me." Eddie's voice was calm, factual. Another pause. "You're insane." Whitmore said it without emotion, just stating a fact. "I'm alive," Eddie said. "They're not." The machine gun opened fire again, a long, sustained burst ripping through the forest. The MG-42 team was still operational, still pinning down the American platoon. Eddie heard American voices shouting, calling for suppression fire, calling for artillery. He scanned his sector, waiting. 2 German soldiers appeared, running forward to support the machine gun position, using the covering fire to advance. Eddie dropped the first at 170 meters. Clean shot, no hesitation. The second made it 10 more meters before Eddie's round caught him in the hip, spinning him into the snow. The German went down hard, screaming. 7 confirmed. Eddie worked the bolt, chambered another round. His hands were steady despite the cold. His breathing was controlled. He felt the cold now, seeping through every layer of clothing, working into his core. But he didn't feel afraid. He felt patient, calm, focused. Deer didn't panic when hunters were near. They waited. They chose their moment. Eddie had learned that lesson in the Pine Barrens years ago. Movement to his right. 3 more Germans moving in a loose formation, heading toward the American position to flank it. Eddie tracked the leader through the scope. Range approximately 210 meters. Long shot through intervening undergrowth. He adjusted for distance, led the target slightly to account for movement, squeezed the trigger with steady pressure. Hit! The German dropped instantly, dead before he understood what happened. The other 2 scattered immediately, diving behind trees, professional reactions. Eddie scanned, waiting for one to break cover. 30 seconds passed. A minute. Finally, one of them shifted position, trying to get a better angle on what he thought was the sniper's position. Eddie saw the movement through a gap in the brush, just a flicker of Feldgrau uniform. Fired. Hit the soldier in the shoulder. The man went down screaming, clutching the wound. The last German didn't move. Smart soldier. He stayed behind his tree, weapon ready, waiting. Playing the same patience game Eddie was playing. Eddie watched him through the scope. Patient. 5 minutes passed. 10. The temperature was dropping. Eddie's fingers were going numb. The German shifted slightly, trying to get more comfortable, probably feeling the same cold Eddie felt. The movement was minimal, just a few centimeters. Eddie fired. The round punched through the edge of the tree, through 2 inches of oak, and caught the German in the neck. Hydrostatic shock. The soldier dropped without a sound, dead instantly. 10 confirmed kills in less than 2 hours. Eddie's radio crackled. "Brennan, we're pulling back. Can you cover?" Whitmore's voice was tense but controlled. The platoon was taking casualties, pinned down by German fire. They needed suppression to break contact and withdraw safely. "Affirm," Eddie said. "Moving in 3 minutes." He checked his ammunition. Maybe 200 rounds left in the canvas bag, enough for what needed doing. The American platoon began withdrawing, fire teams leapfrogging back through the forest in textbook tactical movement. One team provided covering fire while the other moved, then reversed roles. German fire intensified immediately. Rifle shots cracked through the trees. Machine gun bursts tore through undergrowth. The crump of mortar rounds impacting behind American lines, walking toward the withdrawing soldiers. Eddie watched the German position, waiting for targets. A German machine gun team repositioned, trying to get a better angle on the withdrawing Americans. Eddie saw them through the undergrowth, maybe 190 meters out. 3 men carrying the MG-42 and ammunition boxes in metal containers. They were moving fast, professional, staying low. Good soldiers executing a good tactical decision. Eddie led the first carrier, accounting for his movement speed. Fired. Hit. The man dropped the machine gun and fell. The other 2 dove for cover immediately, trained reactions. Eddie worked the bolt, ejecting the spent casing. Fired again at the second man. Missed. The round kicked up snow 2 meters to the left. Eddie chambered another round, adjusted his aim. The third round caught one of them in the leg. The German went down hard, screaming. The remaining German grabbed the machine gun and ran, dragging it toward cover, trying to save the weapon. Eddie fired. Hit him in the back between the shoulder blades. The German dropped the weapon and fell forward into the snow, motionless. 13 confirmed kills. The MG-42 lay abandoned in the snow, useless without its crew. Eddie scanned for new targets. The German fire shifted. They were trying to locate Eddie now, pouring rounds into the tree line, walking fire across suspected sniper positions. Standard counter-sniper procedure. Eddie pressed himself flat against the frozen mud, listening to bullets snap overhead, impact trees, tear through branches. The sound was continuous, overwhelming. None came low enough. They were still aiming too high, searching elevated positions that Eddie wasn't using. Eddie waited until the firing slackened, then scanned his sector again. More movement. 5 German soldiers advancing in a staggered line, trying to flank the American position from the east. They were good soldiers, using cover effectively, moving in short rushes, maintaining spacing. Professional infantry work. Eddie fired on the closest, range approximately 155 meters. Hit. The soldier pitched forward into the snow. Eddie worked the bolt. Fired. Another hit. The second German went down. The remaining 3 went prone immediately, returning fire toward the tree line. Eddie ignored the incoming rounds. None were close. He tracked one German who was trying to low-crawl forward toward better cover. Fired. Hit him in the shoulder. The man stopped moving. 16 confirmed kills. Eddie's hands were numb now. The cold was winning, seeping through gloves, through wool, through skin, into bone. He flexed his fingers, trying to maintain feeling, trying to keep them functional. 20 rounds left in the current clip, 170 in the canvas bag. The Springfield was ice cold, frost forming on the metal. His core temperature was dropping. He could feel it. The 2 remaining Germans from the flanking group were repositioning, moving back toward their own lines. Smart decision. The attack had stalled. Eddie tracked them through the scope. 240 meters. Long shot. Moving targets through undergrowth. Low percentage. He fired anyway. Missed. The round hit a tree trunk. Fired again, leading the target more. The second round caught one of them high in the back. The soldier stumbled, fell, didn't get up. 17 confirmed kills. The forest was chaos now. American fire pulling back in controlled retreat. German fire pursuing, trying to inflict maximum casualties during the withdrawal. Mortar rounds impacting in waves, methodical German artillery procedure. Eddie lay motionless under his log, watching, waiting. His radio crackled constantly. Platoon leaders calling positions, casualties, ammunition status. The familiar chaos of combat. Then he saw the last target. A German officer moving forward with 2 runners, trying to coordinate the advance. The officer was shouting orders, pointing, directing fire, trying to organize his scattered elements. Professional leadership under fire. He was 200 meters out, partially obscured by undergrowth, but Eddie could see enough of him, enough to make the shot. He centered the crosshairs on the officer's chest, adjusted slightly for range, breathed out slowly, squeezed the trigger with steady pressure, fired. The officer dropped instantly, falling backward into the snow. Leadership eliminated. The 2 runners scattered immediately, diving for cover, abandoning their commander. 18 confirmed kills. Eddie lay still, watching, waiting for return fire. None came. The German advance had stalled completely. Their officer was down. Machine gun teams were suppressed or eliminated. The flanking element was scattered and disorganized. The American platoon had the time they needed to break contact. Eddie keyed his radio. "Brennan to Whitmore. Platoon clear to withdraw. I count 18 enemy down." Silence on the radio for several seconds. Then Whitmore's voice, quiet with something that might have been shock. 18. It wasn't a question. It was confirmation of something that shouldn't have been possible. "Confirmed," Eddie said. "I'm pulling back now." He couldn't stay here. The position was compromised. The Germans would saturate this area with artillery once they reorganized. Eddie began the slow process of extraction. He couldn't just stand up and run. That would silhouette him against the forest, make him visible, destroy the concealment that had kept him alive. He had to crawl backward, slow and careful, dragging his Springfield rifle and the canvas ammunition bag, staying below the log line. Every movement was deliberate, controlled. It took 20 minutes to move 30 meters through the undergrowth. His body screamed with cold. Muscles locked from hours of immobility. Fingers barely functional, stiff with hypothermia. But he was alive. 18 Germans weren't. Eddie Brennan's unauthorized tactical innovation on December 14, 1944, resulted in 18 confirmed enemy casualties and enabled his platoon's successful withdrawal from a lethal engagement. His ground-level sniper position violated every established doctrine in Field Manual 2310, yet it proved devastatingly effective in the specific terrain conditions of the Hurtgen Forest. Within weeks, other American soldiers adopted similar techniques, and by January 1945, ground-level concealment had become an unofficial standard practice in dense woodland operations. Brennan's court-martial in February 1945 resulted in reduction in rank and 30 days confinement, but his tactical principles eventually entered official U.S. Army sniper doctrine. This is how military innovation actually occurs, not through committee decisions or revised manuals, but through soldiers who observe, adapt, and refuse to accept preventable losses. Thank you for watching. If you found this historical account valuable, please subscribe to the channel to support our continued examination of documented World War II events. Your subscription helps us bring these stories to light.